Grace and peace, your brother Yehuda or Judah, and I'm here to tackle and do a lecture. The 10 tribes, migration into Africa, undeniable, biblical, and historical proof. The 10 tribes, migration into Africa, undeniable, biblical, and historical proof. So let's get started. But first, let me do this real quick here. The 10 tribes, migration into Africa. Okay? 10 tribes, migration into Africa. Undeniable, biblical, and historical proof. The black Jews of Africa, the black Jews of Africa, Ethiopia, the black Jews of West Africa, the Bantu, the Igbo. When dealing with historical context, the Jews always had a history, always, from ancient times, going all the way back to Abraham, always had a history of migrating further south in Africa. I say further south in Africa because at one particular time, in what we call the Middle East today, was once part of Africa. So Israel always had a history of going further south into Africa to get away from their enemies. Always had a history of Africa being a safe haven through the migration patterns from Abraham to Jacob and his seed when they migrated further south and they went into Egypt, and many other of Jacob's seeds went further south into Africa. Zephaniah 3:10. The prophet Zephaniah actually prophesied before the so-called southern kingdom captivity of Judah. Before the southern captivity of Judah, Zephaniah prophesied and already knew where the 10 tribes went. He already knew, and Isaiah, that the 10 tribes had migrated into Africa because the Jews always used Africa as a safe haven. They always went into Africa. Once again, Zephaniah, when he prophesied before the captivity of Judah. He already knew where the 10 tribes went. And when you go back to 2nd Ezra, it said that they went to a further country to keep the law. Well, Zephaniah already knew where they went. Zephaniah 3:10, he wrote, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, they shall bring mine offering. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Beyond the rivers of Ethiopia is beyond the rivers of the Nile River. As you see, that flows in East Africa, that flows north by the Mediterranean Sea, where you see my cursor right here, the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River, also called the Gihon River in ancient times, excuse me, called the Gihon River in ancient times, the Nile River, and the rivers of Ethiopia, which flowed from the tip of the Mediterranean Sea and flowed all the way down south towards what we call South Africa, in this region right here, right? The rivers. And so it says beyond the rivers. So from this point And this point, and all in this area, where you see the cursor, all in region, this region of Africa, is where the Jews migrated, right here. All in this region is where they migrated. When you read Zephaniah, when you read Zephaniah 3:10, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And this is an ancient biblical map of the land of Ham. The land of Ham. And also one particular time, much of Africa was considered to be Cush. Much of Africa and West Africa, the Horn of Africa, was once considered to be Cush. The black Jews making bricks in Egypt. The Hebrew Israelite slaves in ancient Egypt. You can clearly see that they are black peoples. Black peoples. In fact, white-skinned peoples like Hispanics or Mexicans, they could not endure the sun. The sun in Egypt, they could not endure the heat. And this is why you see the Egyptians and the Hebrew men with their shirts off, is because of the extreme heat. That's why you see their shirts off all the time, even the pharaohs. You always see them with shirts off because they could not, or should I say, for the heat, they kept their shirts off or did not wear any shirts or tops because of the extreme heat. The women, though, the Egyptian women and the Hebrew women, they wore tops. But the Egyptian men and the Hebrew men, they did not wear any tops because of the heat. So when you look at the relief on the walls of Egypt, you can clearly see the men making bricks as mentioned in the Bible. The Hebrews made the bricks, and you can see them topless with shirts off because of the heat. If there was white-skinned peoples like Hispanics or Mexicans, or Europeans, they would get sunburned. They could not stand the heat. Okay, it's very hot in that region. Very hot. A Northern Kingdom Jew. This here is a Northern Kingdom Jew taken from the walls of Assyria. Okay, and you can see the image on the left side, his garment. You can see the fringes near the bottom, and you can see how he's carrying, I don't know if it's a robe, but you can see the fringes right here, right? And it's another Hebrew in front of him, but in another presentation, you will see the entire image, right? But this is a close-up on the right side of this black Northern Kingdom Jew, showing him as a Negro, clearly as a Negro man, because of the region. That was a hot region. Even Sennacherib, king of Assyria, he called all the surrounding nations the black-headed race, meaning black peoples, because of the heat. There was all black race of people. The Jews were black. The Moabites were black. The Ammonites were black. The Egyptians were black. The Assyrians were black. They called themselves the black-headed race. The Syrians were black. 2nd Ezra 13th chapter. This is the chapter that a lot of these Hebrews in the camps, they love to run to justify their theory of the Jews migrating to, or the 10 tribes coming to the Western Hemisphere. 2nd Ezra the 13th chapter. It says, but they took this counsel among themselves that they would lead the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. Right, where never mankind dwelt. That they might keep their statues, which they never kept in their own land. In their own land. Bear with me for a second here. I want to see something real quick here. Bear with me for a quick second. I just want to verify something real quick. Hold on for a quick second, folks. I just want to verify something. Okay, I just verified it. I just want to make sure that my voice is clear and everybody can hear me. I just verified that. Let's continue. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. 42. That they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. It said they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. Right? For the Most High showed signs for them and held still the flood till they passed over. But in this presentation, I'm going to show that they went towards Jerusalem or Samaria, and many of them stayed behind, while the others continued into Africa through Egypt. They took this counsel among themselves and they left, right? And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. And the Most High, he held still the flood in the river until they passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And the same region is called Ozarus. It says through that country. So after they crossed the river, they went through a country. After they crossed the river right here, in these areas, they went south. They went through that country, which was the same region. The same region was part of their destination that they went to, which was Africa, further west in Africa. So they went through that country. They passed over the river and they went south. They went right back towards their homeland. Why would they go up north? Why would they go through Europe? It said they went through that country. They went back towards their homeland. And as we continue, you will see. Then dwelt they there. So the region that they went to, or the further country they went to, they dwelt there until the latter time. And now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again. So the highest, God stayed the springs a second time, just as he did the first time. When you go back, just as he did the first time, right? Verse 44, the Most High showed signs for them and held still the flood till they passed over. Verse 47, the highest stayed the springs again, the second time, the first time, just as he did the first time. In verse 44. When they held still the flood, in verse 47, when they returned, many of them returned back to the land. God did the same exact thing he did in verse 44 and verse 47. The highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore serve the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind where? That is the key. Verse 48. Let's pause for a second. Let's meditate and let's think about this verse right here. Verse 48. Let's get my cursor. But those that be left behind where? Because we just read that God held still the flood. When you go back, and they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river, for the Most High held still the flood till they passed over. Verse 48. But those that be left behind. So after they continued through that country, they went back towards Israel. Why? And how do we know? Because it clearly says in verse 48, but those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. God's borders is Israel, Samaria, and Jerusalem. Okay, this is the border. These are the borders of the Most High. This is the homeland, the holy land that was given to the people, to our ancestors. Okay, Israel, Samaria, Jerusalem. So they went back, because it says right here, but those that be left behind. Who was left behind? They went back towards the homeland, but it says, but those, these are the key words right here. but those that be left behind. Because many of them, when they went back, many of them decided to remain behind. Let's continue. Let's prove it. Let's go to the book of Judith. The book of Judith, chapter 4. Judith, chapter 4, verse 1. Now the children of Israel that dwelt in Judea, they heard all that Holofernes, the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, because when Nebuchadnezzar first took over, he was called king of the Assyrians also. In fact, when you go read the scripture, it let us know that many of the men from the armies of the Assyrians, they joined the Babylonian army. They joined Nebuchadnezzar's army. So he was king of the Assyrians also. When he first became king, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, he had done to the nation. So it says that the children of Israel that dwelt in Judea, okay, they heard all that Holofernes, the captain of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations. And after what manner had he spoiled all their temples, meaning the surrounding nations, and brought them to naught. Verse 2, therefore, they were exceedingly afraid of him. Who was afraid of the king Nebuchadnezzar, chief captain? Holofernes. And Holofernes is the same guy who Judith chopped off his head. This is the same guy right here. But the children of Israel, they heard about this captain and how he took spoil and how he destroyed all the surrounding nations. And it says in verse 2, therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him. So the children of Israel were afraid of him and were troubled for Jerusalem. Why were they troubled for Jerusalem and for the temple of the Lord their God? Let's see why they was troubled for Jerusalem. Verse 3. For they were newly returned from the captivity. They were newly returned from the captivity. Let's pause right there. It says that they were newly returned from the captivity. Let's go back. 2nd Ezra 13:48. But those that be left behind, when they left from above the Euphrates, they went right back towards the homeland. But those that be left behind, now let's go back to the book of Judith. They were exceedingly afraid of him, verse 2, and were troubled for Jerusalem, verse 3. For they were newly returned from the captivity. How could they be newly returned from the captivity? When the Babylonians first took over. When Nebuchadnezzar first came in power, he was king over the Assyrians. How could they be newly returned from the captivity? Who are these Jews that were newly returned from the captivity? For they were newly returned from the captivity, and all the people of Judea were lately gathered together, and the vessels and the altar and the house were sanctified after the profanation, right? But it says that they were newly returned. They was afraid of Captain Holofernes because they were newly returned from the captivity. These Jews that were newly returned from the captivity are those within the 10 tribes that left, that's mentioned in 2nd Ezra. And I'm going to prove it as we continue. Judith chapter 5. And he said unto them, okay, because if you go read the chief captain, Holofernes, he wanted to get information about the children of Israel, right? He wanted to know about this people. So he asked one of the surrounding nations, I think it was a guy or a man from Ammon. He asked him, who are these people? And who are they? Give me information about these people. So he started telling him information about the people and how their forefather Abraham migrated to the region, and how Jacob, his family, went into Egypt, and how they came out of Egypt, led by Moses, and how God had given Israel into the hand of the surrounding nations every time they sinned against him. And he went on and told them, the captain about the nation of Israel, right? And how God constantly gave them into the hands of the enemies whenever they turned their backs against the Most High. So he ran down everything about this people. And he says in verse 3, and he said unto them, tell me, the captain now, ye sons of Canaan, who this people is that dwelleth in the hill country, and what are the cities that they inhabit, and what is the multitude of their army, and wherein is their power and strength? So now he's trying to size up the nation of Israel. So he's asking the sons of Canaan, tell me about these people. Do they have a big army? What country they dwell in, what cities, etc. And what king is set over them, or captain, or captain of their army? So he's asking the sons of Canaan. Verse 6, this people, and they responded, this people are descendant of the Chaldeans, because Abraham came from the Chaldeans. Verse 7, and they journeyed heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea, right? Talking about Abraham. Verse 8, for they left the way of their ancestors, in which Abraham left the ways of his ancestors, and worshiped the God of heaven, the God whom they knew. So they cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia. And this is what Abraham did, and sojourned there many days. So Abraham fled into Mesopotamia. Let's skip down to verse 18. You can read the rest. Verse 18. But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, meaning when the nation of Israel departed from God, they were destroyed in many battles, very sore, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs. So the sons of Canaan told Captain Holofernes that they were led into captives. Now, mind you, this is before the Babylonian captivity. This is before the Babylonians took Judah into captivity. Excuse me. This is before the Babylonians took Judah into captivity. He says, they departed from the way which he appointed them. They were destroyed in many battles and were led into captivity, meaning the Assyrian captivity. They were led into the Assyrian captivity, into a land that was not theirs. And the temple of their God was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. Verse 19. Okay, because they had many temples. Also, they had many worship houses. But now are they returned to their God, and are come up from the places where they were scattered. They were led into captivity, the Assyrian captivity, and now are come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem. These are the 10 tribes right here. They left, they went back to the land, but many of them remained behind. Let's go back. 2nd Ezra 13:48. But those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. Because when they went back, many of them decided to remain behind. Now you understand when you go to Judith, it says here one more time, Judith 4, verse 2, therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him, meaning Holofernes. Verse 3, for they were newly returned from the captivity. They were newly returned from the captivity. And many of them stayed behind. Those that were newly returned from the captivity were those that remained behind. When you go back to 2nd Ezra 13:48. But those that be left behind, okay? These in Judah 4 verse 3, these are the same Jews that were newly returned from the captivity. And all the people of Judea were lately gathered together. So he went on to explain and tell the people. The Jews says, and they sojourned heretofore. Let's continue. Let's go back now. Judah 5 verse 19. But now are they returned, see, their God, or to their God, and are come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem. These are the Jews that remain behind, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. You see that? Let's go to the next. Let's continue. Let's go back to 2nd Ezra 13. 2nd Ezra 13. So now you can clearly see that those Jews within the 10 tribes, that when they migrated and went through that country, they went right back towards Israel, because it said that many of them remained behind. And we just verified, it said, one more time, let's go back. It says one more time in the book of Judith. In the book of Judith, one more time, these people, they told the captain, were led captives into a land that was not theirs. This happened during the Assyrian captivity. Verse 19, but now are they returned to their God and come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem. These are the Jews that was left behind, mentioned in 2nd Ezra. 2nd Ezra 13 verse 16. For as I conceive in my understanding, woe unto them that shall be left in those days, meaning left behind, as we just read, and much more woe unto them that are not left behind, meaning those that went further into Africa, they did not have an easy migration. Verse 17, for they that were not left behind, those that went into Africa, were left in havenness, meaning they did not have an easy migration along the way. Many of them died along the way. They suffered through the migration along the way. That's why it says, that shall be left in those days. Woe unto them that shall be left in those days, meaning left behind in Jerusalem, left behind in the Holy Land. But much more woe unto them that are not left behind. For they that were not left behind, that went further to Africa, were in havenness. They were suffering. They did not go through an easy migration. They did not go through an easy migration. Now you understand and see. Now you can clearly see that they went right back towards the homeland. Let's go back. I know I keep repeating myself and sounding like a broken record, but our people are hard-headed. 2nd Ezra 13. But those that be left behind, after they left Assyria and migrated and crossed the Euphrates and went back, and the Most High held still the flood, etc., right? And they took them a year and a half to get to Osiris, which is West Africa. But those that be left behind, because many of them to stay behind, are they that are found within my borders. God's borders are Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Samaria, and Israel is God's borders. So many of them decided to remain behind. Many of them decided to stay behind, as the rest of them continue into Africa. Let's go back to 2nd Ezra 13, or further south into Africa through Egypt. Let's go back to 2nd Ezra 13. For as I conceive in my understanding, woe unto them that shall be left in those days. I just showed you. They was left behind. Many of them remained behind in God's borders, which is Jerusalem, Israel, and Samaria. They stayed behind while the rest of them went into Africa. Much more woe unto those that are not left behind, meaning was not left behind in God's borders, because they went further into Africa. Verse 17, for they that were not left were in havenness. For they that were not left were in havenness. One more time. For they that were not left were in havenness, meaning they were suffering. They did not have an easy migration. One more time, 2nd Ezra 13:48. But those that be left behind of my people are they that are found within my borders. This is God's borders right here. Israel, Samaria, and Jerusalem, showing you what direction the 10 tribes went when they migrated. Verse 18, 2nd Ezra 13, verse 18. Now understand I the things that are laid up in the latter days. Ezra said, now I understand which shall happen unto them and those that are left behind. So he said, now I understand what's going to take place and happen to these people that decided to stay behind. They stayed behind, and later on, the Babylonians came in there, and there was trouble, as we just read, because they say they was newly returned. Let's go back. They was newly returned from the captivity. Judas 4 verse 2. Therefore, they were exceedingly afraid of Holofernes, the captain of Babylon, and were troubled for Jerusalem because they stayed behind. They decided to remain behind. And it says, verse 3, for they were newly returned from the captivity. They just escaped the Assyrian captivity. So now they are afraid now because they just returned from the captivity. They just returned from the captivity. So now they are afraid. Verse 18, 2nd Ezra 13, verse 18. Now understand I the things that are laid up in the latter days, which shall happen, because now the angel is showing Ezra the vision that this was going to take place, which shall happen unto them and to those that are left behind, those who remain behind, those who are afraid of the captain Holofernes, because it says they were newly returned from the Assyrian captivity. 2nd Ezra 13, verse 19. Therefore are they come into great perils and many necessities, like as these dreams declare. You see, because they did not have an easy migration. When the Jews who did not decide to remain behind, they continued into Africa through Egypt. They did not have an easy migration. Therefore are they, verse 19, coming to great perils, meaning they suffered during their migration. Many of them died along the way. And many necessities, like as these dreams declare. Yet it is easier for him that is in danger to come into these things than to pass away as a cloud out of the world, and not to see the things that are happening in the last days. And he answered unto me and said, verse 21, the interpretation of the vision shall I show thee, and I will open unto thee the thing that thou hast required. Verse 22, whereas thou hast spoken of them that are left behind. Now the angel is saying to Ezra, you saw a vision of those Jews who escaped the Assyrian captivity, part of the 10 tribes. You saw that many of them, Ezra, decided to remain behind in God's borders. Verse 22, whereas thou hast spoken of them that are left behind, Ezra, this is the interpretation. He that shall endure the peril, meaning suffering, in that time has kept himself, that they be fallen into danger. When? They fell into danger when the captain, Holofernes, the captain of Babylon, came into Jerusalem. That's when they fell into danger. That's why they said they was worried because they was newly returned from the captivity. They remained behind while the others went further south into Africa. He that shall endure the peril in that time has kept himself, that are be fallen into danger, and such as have works and faith towards the Almighty. Know this therefore, that they which be left behind, many of them who decided to remain behind in Jerusalem, while the rest of the 10 tribes, or those within the 10 tribes, went further into Africa, are more blessed than they that be dead. Why? Because many of those Jews within the 10 tribes that went further into Africa, many of them died along the way. Many of them died along the way. They did not have an easy migration. They did not have an easy migration. The Jews within the 10 tribes, those who decided not to remain behind, they did not have an easy migration. Let's read it one more time. Verse 24. Know this therefore, that they which be left behind, those who decide to remain behind during the migration, when the 10 tribes left, are more blessed. They are more blessed, even though they was going through trials and tribulations when the Babylonians came down. They are more blessed because it says they are more blessed than they that be dead. Why? Because those that continue further into Africa, they did not have an easy migration. Many of them died along the way. Verse 25. This is the meaning of the vision. Now the angel is telling Esdras the meaning of the vision. Whereas thou sawest a man coming up from the midst of the sea. You can go back and read that in like verse 1, 2nd Esdras 13, verse 1 and 2. That's talking about Christ. The same is he whom God the highest has kept a great season, because Christ was a secret. He was a mystery. He was kept a mystery for a long time, which by his own self shall deliver his creature, his people that was left behind, and those that returned to hear the gospel. That's why God held still the flood a second time in 2nd Esdras, so they can return from Africa. Shall deliver his creature, and he shall order them that are left behind. So Christ is going to order his creatures, his people that are left behind. Let's go to Isaiah 43 and 1. Those who remain behind during the migration. But now, thus says the Lord, that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name. Thou art mine. God said, fear not, talking about Jacob, all 12 tribes. I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name. Verse 2, when thou passest through the waters, God says, when thou pass through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers. What rivers? The rivers of Cush that flows up through Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea, because many of them had to return. Many of them returned. When they found out that the second temple was rebuilt, they came back. And through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. But it says one more time, when thou pass through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee when they return. Because it talks about in verse 1, but now thus says the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. God's going to redeem his people. And they're going to pass through the waters and through the rivers that will not overflow thee. Verse 3, for I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, right? Thy Savior. I gave Egypt for thy ransom. Meaning God says, I gave Egypt as a land for you to dwell in. I gave Ethiopia to you. And many parts of Africa, ancient Africa, was known as Ethiopia. Also, many parts. But watch this here. I gave Egypt for your ransom, for you to dwell in. I gave Ethiopia for you to dwell in. I gave Seba for thee. So he gave Egypt, and he gave Ethiopia for the people, and he gave Seba for thee. So God gave 3 locations mentioned right here, Isaiah 43:3, for his people to dwell in. He gave Egypt for their ransom. He gave Ethiopia for their ransom, and he gave Seba for their ransom, right? Now let's see who Seba descended from. Genesis 10:7. The sons of Cush, Seba, you see, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabekah, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. But it says the sons of Cush, Seba. Let's go back. God says, I gave Egypt for your ransom. I gave Ethiopia for your ransom, for the Jews to dwell in. I gave Seba for the Jews to dwell at. Seba, one of the sons of Cush. So if he gave Egypt and he gave Ethiopia land for the Jews to dwell at, Seba, folks, is a good part of Africa. One more time, Seba was a good part, a major part of the continent of Africa. I gave Seba, and Seba was one of the sons of Cush. At one particular time, just the entire continent of Africa was called Cush. Even the ocean was called the Ethiopic Ocean. The Ethiopic Ocean. So God gave many parts of Africa for the Jews, and Ethiopia and Egypt. Isaiah 43:4. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and people for thy life. Verse 5. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. Let's pause right there for a second. God says, fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. He's going to gather his people from the west. The west, folks, this is a map of West Africa. Right here. From Senegal, Gambia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, all of this. Algeria is where, when you look at an ancient map of Ptolemy, this is where Osiris was located at. Algeria, right in this area, right up here, Osiris was located in this area right here. Because the migration pattern, they went right in this area and then they went down this way. And some came from the east this way. But it says, fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east and gather thee from the west. When you look at a map, Persia and Babylon was east of Israel. East of Israel. Africa is west. This part of Africa is west of Israel. So it says, I will bring thy seed from the west. Isaiah 43:6. And I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. God says he's going to say to the north, give up my people. The north is in this region right here. This is considered the north. And I will say to the south, let's go back. Who's the south? The south is right here. Patros, Elephantine, the Elephantine Jews, because the Jews migrated down further into what we call Patros, right at the tip of Cush or Ethiopia. The Elephantine Jews, they established their colony right here. Let's go back. I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons in from far, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Okay, let's go back one more time. Fear not, I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. This is the west, West Africa. I will say to the north, give up my children. To the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Right? I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far. Right? Give up and to the south. The south. This is the south. Because the Jews went also into South Africa. Keep not back. Bring my sons from far, and my daughters, from the ends of the earth. From the ends of the earth. Isaiah 11 verse 10. And in that day, this is talking about the Messiah. This is a prophecy of the Messiah when he returned, or when he appeared the first time. And in that day, there shall be a root of Jesse, talking about the Messiah, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his glories, and his rest shall be glorious. Talking about Christ, his rest shall be glorious, or glorious. Verse 11, and it shall come to pass. Now this is when Christ come on the scene. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time, because the first time is when Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt. That was the first redemption. This is the second time. This is after the Assyrian captivity. Or should I say, the Persian captivity. After the Persian captivity. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. Christ. Verse 10, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, talking about the Messiah, which shall stand for an ensign for the people. And to it the Gentiles shall seek. Verse 11, the second time, it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time. This is after the Persian captivity, to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt, because many of the Jews went into Egypt, and from Patros. I just showed you. Let's go back to Patros. Here's Patros right here, right down here, almost in Ethiopia, where the Elephantine Jews was dwelling. The Elephantine Jews, they fled with Jeremiah. You see here, Jeremiah was dropped off right here in Tapanaz, but Jeremiah was forced to go. Jeremiah did not want to go into Egypt. He was forced to go. In fact, Jeremiah warned the Jews not to flee into Egypt, but they went further south to get away from the Babylonians. This is the migration route they took right here during the time of Jeremiah. They went further south to get further south and deeper into Africa, running from the Babylonians, because they knew the Babylonians was coming back down there. So they left. Many of them got the hell out of there, and they went further south, excuse me, and they established a community called the Elephantine Jews. And till this day, you have many black Jews still dwelling on the island of Elephantine in Africa. Till this day. And from Egypt and from Patros, I just showed you Patros right here. This is Patros. And Elephantine was part of Patros. Right here. This is Elephantine. You see my cursor pointing at right here. Elephantine was part of Patros. And now on top of that, the Elephantine Jews, they had a temple. They had the only temple outside Jerusalem. So now you know that Elephantine was part of Patros. And from Patros. And from Cush. So it says from Cush. Meaning many parts of Africa also, not just Ethiopia. And from Elam and Shinar, which is Iran in that area, because many of the Jews returned from above the Euphrates and the Tigris. And from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. The islands of the sea is talking about the Mediterranean Sea. These little islands right up here, the Mediterranean Sea. That's what it's talking about. So the Jews, many of them migrated into South Africa, West Africa. Many of them returned from these parts above the Euphrates and Tigris, and they returned during the time of the Messiah, so they can hear the Messiah gospel. Now, this is a close-up of the map. This is a west region and east region. The east region right here of Africa. This is the west region. So it says that God's people are going to return from the west. He's talking about West Africa. West Africa. That's what he's speaking about. The east region and the west region. Hosea 11, verses 7 through 11. It reads, "And my people are bent to backsliding from me, though they call them to the Most High. None at all would exhort him, none at all." And this is a map here on the right side. Excuse me. This is an ancient map. Like I said, at one particular time, just about the whole continent of Africa was called Ethiopia. You see where I got my cursor? Ethiopia. Just about the whole continent of Africa was called Ethiopia, or Kush. "And my people are bent to backsliding from me, though they call them to the Most High, none at all would exhort him." Verse 8, "How shall I give up thee, Ephraim?" God said, how shall I give them up? Also proving and showing that the 10 tribes went into Africa. This is just more confirmation. Verse 8, "How shall I give them up? How shall I give up my people?" God says. "How shall I deliver thee, Israel? How shall I make thee as Admah? How shall I set thee as Zibeam? Mine heart is turned within me." God says, "My repentance are kindled together." Verse 9, "I will not execute the fierceness of mine anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim," meaning all 12 tribes, or mainly the so-called northern kingdom. "For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in the midst of thee. And I will not enter into the city." But verse 8, one more time, it says, "How shall I give up Ephraim?" Verse 10, "They shall walk after the Lord. He, the Lord, shall roar like a lion," meaning he's going to call his people. He's going to call upon his people. He's going to yell for his people. He's going to scream for his people. They shall walk after the Lord. They're going to walk after the Lord, meaning they're going to keep the laws, or try their best to keep the laws where they migrated, which is in West Africa, all this area here, because Second Ezra said that they went to a further country to keep God's statutes. It said they shall walk after the Lord. He shall roar like a lion. He's going to call his people. When he shall roar, meaning call his people, then the children shall tremble from the west. They shall tremble from the west. This is West Africa right here. They're going to return from the west. They're going to return from all these parts. They're going to return back through Egypt, back up to the land. Verse 11. "They shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt." See, they're going to come from the west. As it says in verse 10, they're going to tremble from the west, which is all this area here. But to get back to Jerusalem, they're going to go through what? Verse 11, "They shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt." They're going to go through Egypt, because Egypt is not west. Egypt is right here where you see my cursor. All of this in this area here is West Africa, but this is Egypt. But in order to get to Jerusalem, they had to go through Egypt. They had to go through Egypt. I'll let you folks ponder on that real quick. I'll let you ponder on that one. One more time. "They shall walk after the Lord. He shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, they shall tremble from the west." They're going to come from the west. They shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt. They're going to go through Egypt. See, they're going to go through Egypt. Go right back up. And this prophecy is before the Babylonian captivity. Baruch chapter 5. Give us more confirmation. Baruch chapter 5. Baruch 5 give us more confirmation. It reads here, Put off, O Jerusalem, the garment of mourning and affliction, and put on the comeliness of the glory that cometh from God forever. Because many of the Jews that escaped the Assyrian captivity, they remain behind. Verse 5, Arise, O Jerusalem, and stand on high, and look about towards the east, and behold thy children, because Jerusalem, when you go back, look at the map, Jerusalem is really, it says about the east, because it's really east of West Africa. About the east. That's why it says about the east. And look about the east, and behold thy children gather from the west. Gather from the west region of Africa. They gathered from the west and to the east. Go back now. The west, this is west, and this is east. That's why I said Jerusalem, look about the east. Because Jerusalem was east of these parts of West Africa where the Jews was migrating. The 10 tribes was dwelling. So Jerusalem is right in this area, and this is West Africa. And behold, thy children gather from the west and to the east, by the word of the Holy One, rejoicing in the remembrance of God. So they return from the west, and they gather from the west and to the east into Jerusalem. Baruch 5:6. Here's the kicker right here. Now I want you folks to put on your thinking caps. Baruch 5:6. For they departed from thee on foot, which is true. The Jews departed on foot and were led captive of their enemies. That's true. They was led captives on foot. But God bringeth them into thee. But wait a minute. They left on foot in captivity, for they departed from thee on foot and were led away captive. So they was led away captive on foot. But it says here that they are going to return from the west. So how could they have migrated on foot and was led away captives on foot but return from the west? One more time. How could they have been led away captives on foot but return or be gathered from the west, as it says in Baruch 5? Baruch 5 said they will be gathered from the west. They will return from the west to the east in Jerusalem. So if they departed on foot and were led away captive in verse 6, how could they return in verse 5 from West Africa? Because these are the Jews that had escaped the Assyrian captivity. These are the Jews within the 10 tribes returning, as Hosea prophesied, as Isaiah prophesied, as Zephaniah prophesied in Zephaniah 3:10. These are the Jews that return, that escaped, that went to the further country to keep the law. And then God says he's going to hold back the flood. That's why it says, and now when they shall begin to return, the Most High is going to hold back the flood, and he held back the floods this time in the Egyptian rivers, the Gihon or the Nile rivers. Verse 5. Arise, O Jerusalem, and stand on high, and look about towards the east. One more time. And behold, thy children gather from the west. This is the west here. All this west. This is east. and to the east by the word of the Holy One, rejoicing in the remembrance of God. For they departed from thee on foot. So they departed on foot. They was taken captivity right up here, and was led away captive. But God bringeth them again. How he bring them again? It says here, and behold, thy children gathered from the west, West Africa. These are the Jews within the 10 tribes. They returned. They was taken away on foot into captivity. They escaped the Assyrian captivity during the Assyrian civil war. They went further south into Africa, while many of them remained behind in Jerusalem. They went further west into Africa. Some of them did go south, but many of them went west. And they returned. That's why God said, Jerusalem, stand and look on high, and see thy brethren come from the west. For they departed from thee on foot, and were led captive. Another map. You can see the compass right up here. Another compass, just to get a better breakdown of the scripture here. One more time. Arise, O Jerusalem, and stand on high, and look about towards the east, and behold, thy children gather from the west. See, this is the compass right here. So this is north, this is east, and this is west, south, and west. West, southwest, and west. So they came back from West Africa, but they departed into slavery on foot. These are the Jews within the 10 tribes that return. For they departed from thee on foot, and were led away captive of their enemies. But God bringeth them back again. So they came back from the west, because it says, God gathered his people from the west, Africa. Isaiah 8:14. And he shall be a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense, talking about Christ, to both houses, the so-called northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel, both houses. Christ was a stumbling block. He was denied. He was rejected by both houses. That also proved that all 12 tribes were in the land. For it says, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Both houses were dwelling in Jerusalem. The northern kingdom Jews and the southern kingdom Jews, so-called, both of them was dwelling in Jerusalem. Verse 15, and many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken, because Isaiah is prophesying, and be broken and be snared and be taken. Taken where? They went to captivity. Bind up the testimony, Isaiah told his disciples, because Isaiah had disciples. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. Go back. And many among them shall be stumbled and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken into captivity. Both houses denied Christ. He's prophesying about the Messiah and how these 12 tribes will reject the Messiah. Will reject the Messiah. He says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. So Isaiah even had disciples, which means students. Verse 17, and I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. Verse 19, and when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God, for the living to the dead, to the law and to the testimony? If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. There is no light in them, because Christ was that light. Isaiah was prophesying about the Messiah also. He said that he would be a stumbling block to both nations. Okay, Christ cursed and denied as king. Isaiah 8:21. And they shall pass through it, wholly bested and hungry. And it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, that they shall fret themselves and curse their king. They shall curse their king. They curse Christ and their God, and look upward. So they cursed Christ. All 12 tribes denied him because he said he was a stumbling block to both houses. Let's go back one more time. And he shall be as a sanctuary, but as a stumbling, a rock of offense to both houses. So both houses denied Christ. They both denied him. And they shall fret themselves, Isaiah 8:21. They shall fret themselves and curse their king. They curse Christ and their God, and look upward. And they shall look unto the earth, and behold, trouble and darkness and dimness of anguish, and they shall be driven to darkness. Okay, because Israel walked in darkness mentally before the arrival of the Messiah. They walked in darkness mentally. Isaiah 9 chapter, the birth of the Messiah. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation. Let me start over. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be in such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievous afflict, etc. The people that walk in darkness, they have seen a great light, because the nation was walking in darkness mentally. They have seen the great light, Christ. They saw the great light, that they dwell in the land of the shadow of death. Upon them has the light shine, that has multitude. Right? Let's continue. Christ, the Son of the mighty God, Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be Wonderful, Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. He was the mighty God, right? Isaiah 9:7. Of the increase of his government and the peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord, meaning Christ, of hosts will perform this. Isaiah 8:14. And he shall be as a sanctuary, but for a stumbling block, right? A stumbling block, and for a rock of offense to both houses. Both. Let's go back to 2 Ezra 13. Verse 41. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would lead the multitude of the heathen and go forth to a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river, for the Most High showed signs for them, and held still the flood until they passed over. Babylon and Assyria did not set Israel free. One more time. Babylon and Assyria, they did not set Israel free. It was the Persians who set them free. They escaped on their own. Facts. Thus says the Lord of hosts. The children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast, and they refused to let them go. They refused to let them go. So if they refused to let them go, you know they did not give them no ships, because it was the Persians who allowed them to return and to rebuild, right? The Persians. The Babylonians and the Assyrians, they did not set Israel free, but rather they escaped on their own. They escaped. Isaiah 10. The 10 tribes returned to Christ. Verse 20. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such are escaped Let's start over. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob. When did the house of Jacob escape? When did the house of Jacob escape? And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob, they shall no more again stay. They shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, meaning the Assyrians, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. So it says that the remnant of the house of Jacob and such as are escaped of them. When did they escape? These is talking about the Jews within the 10 tribes. They escaped during the Assyrian civil war. Verse 21, the remnant shall return. This shows also that the 10 tribes did not come to no Americas, because it said they will return. Even the remnant of Jacob, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. Who is the mighty God? Let's go back. Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. But Christ is also called the Mighty God. The Mighty God. So these Jews, and it shall come to pass that the remnant of Israel and such are escaped of the house of Jacob. Verse 21, the remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. So the 12 tribes and the Jews within the 10 tribes, they return back to the land, unto the mighty God, and to Christ, because they had to hear the gospel. That's why God sent his son in the first place, to teach his people the gospel. Verse 22, for though the people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. See? And we know that those that return, it says, those that escaped of the house of Jacob. They escaped because the Assyrians did not give them no ships, because it says that they refused all them that took them captives, Jeremiah 50:33, all that took them captives, they held them fast, and they refused to let them go. So they escaped, but they returned to the remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. So they returned to Christ. Let's go to Judith chapter 4. Verse 1. Now the children of Israel that dwelt in Judea heard all the Holofernes, the chief captain, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and after what manner he had spoiled all their temples and brought them to naught. Verse 2, therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him, and were troubled for Jerusalem, and for the temple of the Lord their God. Verse 3, for they were newly returned from the captivity. Let's go back. Isaiah 10. Verse 21, the remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. Then in verse 20, and such are escaped of the house of Jacob. They escaped. These are the Jews that escaped. In Judith 4, verse 3, they was afraid of the captain of Nebuchadnezzar, because it says right here, for they were newly returned from the captivity. And all the people of Judea were lately gathered together. They were newly returned from the captivity. They escaped the captivity, as mentioned in Isaiah. I just read in the book of Isaiah. They escaped. Let's read about the Assyrian Civil War after Sennacherib's death. It says here, on the left side, you can see Esau Harden. Esau Harden was one of Sennacherib's sons. In fact, he was the youngest son. And what happened, before Sennacherib died, he told his youngest son that he would be king after him. So what happened is Esau Harden's two older sons, they plotted together. They killed their father. That's in the Bible. They took him out and they plotted against Esau Harden. But what happened is Esau Harden went into exile. He returned with an army and he was able to defeat his two brothers and take over. But let's read and see what happens right here. It says, after Sennacherib's eldest son and their hire, Ashur Nadin Shumi, had been captured and presumably executed in 694. The new hire had originally been the second eldest son. You see that? Bear with me for a second. So it says the new hire was supposed to be originally being the second eldest son. It says Arda Mulisu. But in 684, Esau Harden, a younger son, was appointed instead. This is him right here. Angered by this decision, Arda Mulisu and another brother, Nabusha Usur, they murdered their father in 681. And you can read about that in the Bible. How Sennacherib's sons murdered him, right? And planned to seize the Assyrian throne. The murder and Arda Malusu's aspirations of becoming king himself made Esau Harden's rise to the throne difficult. And he first had to defeat, look what it says here, he first had to defeat his brothers in a 6-week long civil war. So he fought his brothers for 6 weeks of civil war. 6 weeks of civil war. During the 6 weeks of civil war is when the Jews escaped within the 10 tribes. Let's go back. Let's go back to Isaiah 10. Isaiah 10. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob, and they came and returned slowly to the mighty God. Let's go back now. It says by Esau Harden, and made Esau Harden's rise to the throne difficult, and he first had to defeat his brothers in a 6-week long civil war. So during the civil war is when the 10 tribes, is when they decided to escape. Is when they escaped. But the thing is this here, they did not all escape at the same time. One more time, they did not all escape at the same time. They all knew it was a civil war because they were scattered. They was living far from each other. Some was living 100 miles apart, but they all knew it was a civil war. So they all decided to leave. That's why 2nd Ezra says they took the counsel among themselves to leave. Let's go read about Eldad the Danite. Eldad the Danite, the Jewish travelers in the Middle Ages, 19 first-hand accounts. Let's go inside. Eldad the Danite. Eldad, the tribe of Dan, lived in the latter part of the 9th century, according to his own story. Came from the east of Africa. See, East Africa, near the Gulf of Eden. Okay, it says, perhaps Somaliland, according to the Khaled author. Let's see what he said about Sennacherib. He wrote, he says, afterwards Sennacherib, king of the Assyria, arose and took the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh captive. And he took them to Halah and Habor and the river Gozan, or Gozan, and the cities of Media. And you can read about that also in the Bible. And Sennacherib arose a second time and took captive the tribe of Asher and the tribe of Naphtali, and led them to the land of Assyria. And after the death of Sennacherib, 3 tribes of Israel, being Naphtali, near the top here, being Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, they journeyed on their own to the land of Ethiopia, because that was an ancient route they took also. Many of them went south to Ethiopia, and then they went west. They went south, and then they went west, while many of them went through Egypt and went west through upper Africa, or towards the Mediterranean Sea, and then they went south into West Africa. Being Naphtali, Gad, and Asher journeyed on their own to the land of Ethiopia, and they camped in the wilderness until they came to their border, a 20 days journey, and they slew the men of Ethiopia. And unto this very day they fight with the children of the kingdom of Ethiopia. Bear with me for a second. So there you have it, folks. That's a quick little presentation just to show everybody that Second Ezra, when it talks about the 10 tribes migration pattern, it talks about the 10 tribes going to Africa. And no getting around it. Point blank, period. They went to Africa. And grace and peace. Shalom.